Hello and welcome back guys. Today we are starting a new story titled Necromancer, written by Death12976. Please check the link in the description. And let's start. Chapter 1. The boar who whispered to Bones. The sterile scent of antiseptic clung to the air in the doctor's office, a smell Izuku would forever associate with the day his life fractured and reformed into something else. At 4 years old, he was a whirlwind of all-might-inspired energy, bouncing in his seat with an impatience that tugged at his too-big all-might t-shirt. His mother, Inko, sat beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, a nervous smile gracing her lips. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a stark white glow on the posters of smiling heroes that adorned the walls, the stark contrast to the chilling power that was about to be revealed. Midoriya-kun, the doctor began, adjusting his glasses, his gaze shifting between the tablet in his hands and the anxious mother and son before him. The results of your quirk assessment are quite unusual. Inko's breath hitched. Unusual. That word held a weight that neither she nor Izuku were prepared for. All Might's booming laughter and heroic feats filled their small apartment, a constant source of hope for Izuku, who desperately yearned for a quirk of his own. His classmates had already begun manifesting their abilities: Bakugo's explosive palms, a girl with telekinetic control over small objects, another who could elongate her fingers. Izuku felt like a late bloomer, a silent observer in a world bursting with extraordinary power. Unusual, Inko echoed, her voice barely a whisper. Is this something wrong? The doctor sighed, a sound that seemed to deflate the already tense atmosphere. Not necessarily wrong, Midoriya-sen. But Midoriya-kun's quirk is unlike anything I've encountered before. The records are inconclusive in terms of direct precedent. He tapped the tablet, his brow furrowed in thought. We've identified it as a necromancy-type quirk. Izuku tilted his head, his bright green eyes wide with curiosity. Necromancy. The word felt foreign on his tongue, heavy and strange. It didn't sound heroic, not like All Might's earth-shattering punches or Endeavor's blazing inferno. The doctor nodded slowly. Yes, it appears Midoriya-kun has the ability to interact with and manipulate the deceased. Our initial tests, while limited due to his age, suggest he can animate skeletal structures and, well, other organic matter that is no longer living. Inko's face paled. Animate the dead. Her voice trembled, a mixture of disbelief and a dawning horror. She glanced at Izuku, her eyes searching his innocent features as if trying to reconcile them with the grim nature of the described quirk. Izuku, however, was still processing the information with the unfiltered wonder of a child. Like zombies, he asked, his voice filled with a strange blend of fascination and apprehension. He'd seen depictions of zombies in old horror movies his neighbor sometimes watched, shambling figures with vacant eyes and outstretched arms. The idea was both terrifying and strangely compelling. In a rudimentary sense, yes, the doctor confirmed, his tone cautious. However, it's far more nuanced than simple reanimation. Our readings indicate a form of control, a connection to what we might call negative energy, or the life force that has departed. He hesitated, then continued, we also detected minute energy expenditure during these activations. So small, in fact, that it wouldn't register as fatigue in an adult, let alone a child. It's as if the power source is almost inexhaustible for these basic functions. The doctor then elaborated on the potential aspects of Izuku's quirk based on the limited readings and theoretical understanding. He spoke of raising skeletons and rudimentary zombies, the potential for creating more powerful undead in the future, and the subtle control Izuku seemed to exert over them even now. He touched upon the theoretical possibilities of draining life force, though he quickly dismissed it as unlikely to manifest at such a young age and potentially requiring a level of mastery far beyond a child's grasp. As the doctor spoke, Inko's initial shock began to morph into a deep-seated worry. A hero who controlled the dead. The very concept felt wrong, tainted. Heroes were supposed to be symbols of life, of hope, of protection against the darkness. Necromancy conjured images of shadowy figures, of villains who reveled in the macabre. Izuku, on the other hand, was starting to see a flicker of something interesting. While it wasn't the flashy, heroic quirk he'd always dreamed of, it was undeniably unique. The idea of commanding an army, even if it was an army of skeletons, held a certain allure. He imagined them standing beside him, silent and unwavering, ready to defend the innocent. The doctor concluded his explanation with a somber tone. Midoriya-san, Midoriya-kun, it's crucial that we understand the full scope and limitations of this quirk as Midoriya-kun grows. We will need to schedule regular checkups and monitor its development closely. Given the nature of the quirk, it's advisable to exercise extreme caution and discretion in its use. As they left the doctor's office, the bright afternoon sun seemed to mock Inko's inner turmoil. Izuku walked beside her, his small hand clutching hers, his usual cheerful chatter absent. He was lost in thought, a whirlwind of skeletal warriors and shadowy figures dancing in his mind. The first true manifestation of Izuku's quirk outside the sterile environment of the doctor's office occurred a few weeks later, in the quiet solitude of their small backyard. Inko had been tending to her small patch of wilting sunflowers, her brow furrowed with concern. Izuku sat on the overgrown grass, poking idly at a discarded bird bone he'd found near the fence. He remembered the doctor's words, the strange term, necromancy, echoing in his mind. He focused on the bone in his hand, a fragile white shard against his small palm. He imagined it moving, twitching, coming alive. It was a silly thought, a childish fantasy. And then it happened. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer of dark energy enveloped the bone. It twitched, then shuddered, and with a soft, dry clicking sound, it began to move. It wasn't a fluid, lifelike movement, but rather a jerky, puppet-like animation. The bone stood upright on the grass, wobbling precariously. Izuku gasped, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and awe. He hadn't consciously done anything, not in the way he imagined using a quirk would feel. It was as if the thought itself had been enough, a silent command issued from the depths of his being. He cautiously reached out a finger and gently poked the animated bone. It tilted slightly but remained standing. He focused again, this time picturing the bone moving towards a fallen leaf. Slowly, haltingly, the bone hopped across the grass and nudged the leaf. Inko, noticing Izuku's unusual stillness, turned from her sunflowers. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she saw the small, white bone twitching on the grass. "Izuku, what is that?" she asked, her voice laced with apprehension. Izuku looked up at his mother, his green eyes shining with a strange light. It's my quirk, Mama. I think I can make dead things move." Over the next few months, Izuku's understanding of his quirk grew, albeit in a clumsy, childlike way. He discovered he could animate not just bones, but also diseased insects, fallen leaves, and even the discarded remains of fish his neighbor sometimes left out for the stray cats. The energy cost remained negligible, a faint whisper at the edge of his awareness. He learned that his control was rudimentary at best. His animated subjects moved slowly and erratically, their movements dictated by his simple thoughts and visualizations. He couldn't make them perform complex tasks, nor could he sustain their animation for extended PRDS without focusing his attention. Despite the limitations, a strange fascination took root within him. He spent hours in the backyard, his small figure surrounded by a macabre menagerie of twitching bones and shuffling insect husks. He didn't understand where this power came from, this ability to breathe a semblance of life into the lifeless. It felt both unnatural and intrinsically a part of him. Inko watched her son with a growing sense of unease. While she tried to remain supportive, the nature of his quirk filled her with a quiet dread. She worried about how others would react, about the stigma attached to such a dark ability. She tried to steer him towards more conventional play, buying him All Might figurines and encouraging him to emulate the symbol of peace. But Izuku's interest remained fixated on the strange power that resided within him. He began to experiment, pushing the boundaries of his abilities in small, secret ways. He found that the more he focused, the more animated his creations became, their movements slightly less jerky, their responses a fraction quicker. One afternoon, while playing in a small patch of woods near their apartment, Izuku stumbled upon the skeletal remains of a small animal, likely a stray cat. An idea sparked in his mind. He focused his energy, picturing the scattered bones reassembling, standing, moving. Slowly, painstakingly, the bones began to shift. Ribs arched, vertebrae aligned, and a skull tilted upwards, its empty sockets seeming to stare into the dappled sunlight. It was a crude, incomplete skeleton, held together by an unseen force, but it was undeniably there, a tangible manifestation of his power on a scale he hadn't achieved before. A thrill, cold yet exhilarating, coursed through him. He had created something from nothing, given form to what was once gone. He cautiously reached out and touched the skeletal head. It felt dry and brittle beneath his fingertips, yet it responded to his touch, tilting its head as if in acknowledgement. He spent the rest of the afternoon in the woods, practicing with the skeletal remains. He learned to direct its movements, to make it walk, albeit clumsily, and to follow simple commands. He even tried to make it attack a fallen branch, the brittle bones clattering against the wood. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows through the trees, a sense of unease settled over Izuku. This felt different. More significant than animating a bird bone or a dead beetle. This was a creature, however rudimentary, formed from the very essence of death. He dispelled the animation, the skeletal remains collapsing back into a pile of scattered bones. He felt a strange mix of accomplishment and a prickle of something akin to guilt. It was a secret he knew he couldn't share with his mother, not yet. As Izuku grew older, his quirk continued to develop in subtle yet significant ways. The range and complexity of the undead he could animate increased. He moved beyond simple skeletons and rudimentary zombies, discovering he could raise more substantial figures. These weren't always based on existing corpses. Sometimes, from the shadows or the very earth itself, forms would coalesce, shadowy figures with glowing eyes, monstrous shapes vaguely reminiscent of creatures from fantasy books he'd devoured. He still didn't understand where these beings came from. They seemed to materialize from an unseen realm, drawn by his will and the latent negative energy he unconsciously exuded. They obeyed his commands with a silent, unwavering loyalty, their movements more fluid and their forms more defined than his earlier attempts with actual remains. His control also sharpened. He could direct multiple undead simultaneously, assigning them different tasks with a mere thought. The stamina cost remained almost non-existent, allowing him to maintain a small retinue of animated beings for extended PRDs without any noticeable drain. However, the nature of his quirk began to shape his personality in ways that worried Inko. The constant interaction with death and the silent, unliving entities under his command fostered a sense of detachment from the vibrant, bustling world around him. He became increasingly withdrawn, his interactions with his classmates becoming terse and infrequent. He found their boisterous energy and often petty squabbles grating. They seemed so focused on the fleeting dramas of childhood, oblivious to the profound silence and the ancient power that resided within him. He preferred the company of his undead, their silent obedience a stark contrast to the often unpredictable nature of living beings. Towards strangers, Izuku developed a cold and blunt demeanor. He saw no need for pleasantries or superficial interactions. Their opinions held little weight for him, their lives seeming fragile and ephemeral compared to the enduring presence of his spectral companions. He spoke only when necessary, his words concise and often devoid of emotion. But towards his mother, and later, towards a select few who managed to penetrate his hardened exterior, Izuku displayed a deep and unwavering affection. He knew Inko worried about him, about the path his quirk seemed to be leading him down. He tried, in his own quiet way, to reassure her, to show her that the darkness he commanded did not define him entirely. He would often bring her small, unusual gifts, a perfectly preserved butterfly he had reanimated for a fleeting moment, a smooth, grey stone that seemed to hum with a faint, unseen energy. Inko, despite her fears, cherished these gestures, seeing in them the remnants of the kind and gentle boy she had raised. She knew his quirk was a part of him, and while she didn't fully understand it, she accepted it, her love for her son unwavering. As Izuku entered middle school, his reputation preceded him. Whispers followed him down the hallways, the creepy kid, the death mage, the one with the zombie quirk. Most students avoided him, their fear and discomfort palpable. He didn't care. Their opinions were irrelevant. He had his own silent protectors, his own understanding of the world that lay beyond the veil of life. Bakugo, however, was a constant, abrasive presence. His explosive quirk and volatile personality seemed to thrive on confrontation, and Izuku, with his quiet intensity and unnerving abilities, became a frequent target of his taunts. Deku, Bakugo would sneer, his crimson eyes flashing. Still playing with your dead things. You'll never be a hero with a quirk like that. It's villainous. Izuku would simply meet his gaze, his own green eyes devoid of fear or anger. Sometimes, a faint shadow would flicker behind him, a silent warning that even Bakugo seemed to instinctively recognize. He never explicitly threatened Bakugo, but the unspoken presence of his undead was often enough to quell the worst of his aggression. It is a quirk, Izuku would state simply, his voice flat. It can be used for good or ill, like any other. His words, devoid of emotion and yet carrying a certain weight, often left Bakugo sputtering with frustrated rage. He couldn't quite understand Izuku's lack of reaction, the cold indifference that seemed to shield him from his taunts. Despite the isolation, Izuku continued to hone his abilities. He learned to summon different types of undead gaunt, skeletal warriors armed with spectral weapons, shadowy figures that could slip through walls, and hulking, monstrous forms that exuded an aura of raw power. He discovered that the strength and abilities of his undead were tied to his focus and the amount of negative energy he channeled into them, though the stamina cost remained remarkably low. He also began to explore the more subtle aspects of his quirk. He found he had a heightened sensitivity to areas where death had recently occurred, a faint chill in the air and a lingering echo of departed life force. He could sense the presence of other living beings with a subtle awareness, a faint warmth in the tapestry of the world around him. Communing with spirits proved to be a more elusive ability. He occasionally felt faint whispers, fleeting impressions of sorrow or anger clinging to places touched by death, but he couldn't yet decipher them or establish any meaningful communication. Soul manipulation remained a theoretical concept, something hinted at in ancient texts he'd occasionally find online, detailing obscure and often forbidden practices. He had no longing to delve into such dark arts, his focus primarily on the protective and utilitarian aspects of his quirk. Immortality and dark rituals held no appeal for him. His connection to death was a tool, a power he wielded, not a path he sought to fully embrace. He valued the warmth of life, the simple comfort of his mother's presence, even if he often found the living world chaotic and overwhelming. Shadow magic became a natural extension of his abilities. He could manipulate shadows, using them to conceal his movements, create illusions, and even solidify them into tangible forms. It was a subtle art, weaving darkness into the fabric of reality. Poison and disease held no inherent attraction for him, though he recognized the potential for their use. He preferred the directness of his undead, their silent strength a more reliable weapon. Teleportation through shadow remained beyond his grasp, a complex application of his quirk that he had yet to master. Divination related to death manifested in small, unsettling ways. He would sometimes experience vivid, dreamlike visions of past tragedies or future dangers, though they were often fragmented and difficult to interpret. Creating wards and barriers using necromantic energy became a focus of his training. He learned to weave a subtle field of negative energy around himself and his home, a deterrent to unwanted intrusions and a subtle dampener on malevolent intent. Shape-shifting into undead or shadowy forms was a theoretical possibility he hadn't yet explored, the very idea feeling alien to his sense of self. Dark animation became a deliberate practice. He learned to infuse his undead with a more potent form of negative energy, enhancing their strength, speed, and resilience. These, darkened, undead possessed a more menacing aura, their eyes burning with an inner shadow. Shadow puppetry emerged as a technique for controlling his undead from a distance. By extending tendrils of shadow, he could manipulate their movements with greater precision and subtlety, allowing for more complex maneuvers. Dark healing was a concept he instinctively shied away from. The idea of using negative energy to mend living flesh felt inherently wrong, a perversion of the natural order. Necrotic aura manifested passively, a subtle chill that often accompanied his presence. It wasn't strong enough to cause significant harm, but it often made those around him uneasy. BLD magic held no allure. The idea of using life force, even indirectly, for his own gain felt repugnant. Here is everything he can do, control and animation of the dead, raising skeletons and zombies, creating more powerful undead, ghouls, specters, wraiths, liches, etc. Commanding undead, strengthening undead, healing, repairing undead, dispelling undead, creating undead armies, dark animation, infusing undead with particularly malevolent or potent dark magic, granting them enhanced abilities or unique dark powers. Shadow puppetry, animating corpses using shadows as tethers, allowing for more subtle control or long-range manipulation. Manipulation of death and life force, draining life force energy, withering and necrotic damage, resisting death, detecting life and death, communing with. Spirit soul manipulation, trapping, binding, stealing, destroying, immortality, prolonged life, often through dark rituals or undeath, dark healing, using negative energy to heal oneself or others, often with unsettling side effects or requiring a dark sacrifice. Necrotic aura, emitting an aura of death and decay that can weaken living beings or instill fear. Dark magic and rituals, necromantic spells and incantations, often drawing on dark energies, dark rituals, involving sacrifice, forbidden knowledge, and potent dark magic, creating necromantic artifacts, imbued with dark power and often cursed, curses and hexes, drawing on dark magic to inflict misfortune, pain, and death. Shadow magic, manipulating shadows for offense, defense, concealment, and even transportation, poison and disease, often magically enhanced with dark energies for greater potency. And insidious effects, BLD magic, utilizing BLD as a conduit for dark magic, often for potent spells or rituals. Bone magic, shaping and manipulating bones, their own or those of others, for offensive or defensive purposes, sometimes imbued with dark energy. Forbidden knowledge, accessing and wielding arcane secrets related to death and dark magic, often at a great personal cost or risk. Other potential abilities, setting dependent teleportation, movement through shadow or other dark dimensions. Illusions and deception, themed around death, fear, and darkness, often enhanced by dark magic. Divination related to death and the Shadowfell or other dark realms, creating wards and barriers, imbued with dark magic to repel life or other magical forces. Shape-shifting into undead, shadowy, or monstrous forms through dark magic. Summoning dark entities, calling upon or making pacts with dark spirits, demons, or other malevolent beings associated with death and shadow. Mind control, domination, using dark magic to exert control over the minds of the living, often in a more forceful or corrupting way than standard enchantment. Creating dark minions, fashioning servitors from shadow, bone, or corrupted life force, distinct from traditional undead. Chapter 2. The symbol and the shadow. The cacophony of destruction echoed through the shopping district. Screams mingled with the shattering of glass and the groans of twisted metal. It was a scene of chaos, a stark reminder of the ever-present threat of villainy that plagued their society. Izuku, on his way home from school, found himself caught in the middle of it. The villain was a hulking figure, his skin a patchwork of rough scales, his eyes glowing with malevolent red light. His quirk seemed to be a form of enhanced strength and durability, coupled with the ability to manipulate the very ground beneath his feet, sending fissures snaking through the pavement and hurling debris like projectiles. Heroes were already on the scene, but they were struggling. Metricton Lady was attempting to contain the damage, her colossal form struggling to maneuver in the narrow streets. Kamui Woods was using his arbor lash to try and restrain the villain, but his wooden tendrils were easily shattered by the villain's brute force. The crowd panicked, their cries of fear and confusion adding to Theiden. Izuku, however, remained strangely calm. He had witnessed violence before, the aftermath of petty crimes, the occasional quirk-related scuffle. But this was different, a raw display of destructive power that threatened to overwhelm the city itself. A familiar surge of energy pulsed within him, a dark current that resonated with the chaos around him. He felt the pull of it, the urge to act, to intervene. It wasn't a heroic impulse, not in the way All Might would describe it. It was something deeper, a primal response to the disruption of the natural order, the violation of the delicate balance between life and death. He stepped forward, pushing his way through the terrified crowd. His eyes, usually a soft green, now burned with an inner light, reflecting the chaos and the power that was about to be unleashed. "Stop!" a voice boomed, cutting through the noise. All Might had arrived, his signature smile plastered across his face, his presence radiating an aura of hope and invincibility. The crowd erupted in cheers, their fear momentarily forgotten in the face of their beloved hero. All Might charged towards the villain, his movements a blur of speed and power. A shockwave of air followed his every punch, the ground trembling beneath his feet. The villain roared in defiance, meeting All Might's blows with equal ferocity. The clash of their powers sent shockwaves rippling through the air, shattering windows and sending debris flying. Izuku watched the battle unfold, his mind racing. All Might was strong, incredibly so, but the villain was relentless, his attacks growing more desperate and destructive. He noticed a large chunk of rubble hurtling towards a group of civilians, their faces frozen in terror. Without hesitation, Izuku acted. He extended his hand, his fingers twitching, and the shadows around him seemed to deepen, to coalesce. From the darkness, figures emerged, skeletal warriors clad in tattered armor, their eyes glowing with an airy green light. They moved with unnatural speed, their bones clicking against the pavement. Some intercepted the falling debris, shattering it into harmless fragments. Others moved towards the villain, their spectral weapons shimmering in the light. All Might, mid-pinch, paused, his eyes widening in surprise. The villain, momentarily distracted, stumbled back, his scaled face contorted in confusion and fear. What are those things?" the villain stammered, his voice trembling. All Might landed beside Izuku, his muscular form casting a long shadow. He looked down at the boy, his blue eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Young man," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, "are those your quirk?" Izuku nodded, his gaze fixed on the battlefield. "They are under my control." He gestured with his hand, and the skeletal warriors moved forward in unison. They fought with a silent ferocity, their spectral weapons cutting through the air, their movements precise and coordinated. The villain, overwhelmed by their sudden appearance and their relentless assault, found himself on the defensive. He roared and thrashed, but the undead warriors were tireless, their numbers seemingly endless. Izuku summoned more of his undead, a wave of skeletal archers appearing on rooftops, raining down a barrage of spectral arrows. Hulking, monstrous figures emerged from the shadows, their forms vaguely reminiscent of ancient beasts, their roars echoing through the streets. The sheer number of undead was staggering. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, materialized at Izuku's command, their ranks swelling with each passing moment. The villain, his initial arrogance replaced by terror, was completely outmatched. All Might watched in awe, his usual boisterous demeanor replaced by stunned silence. He had never witnessed anything like this before. The sheer power, the control, the sheer scale of it was unsettling. He saw one of the skeletal warriors push a rookie hero out of the way of a falling metal beam, taking the brunt of the impact. The skeleton shattered into pieces, but the hero was unharmed. "They're protecting people," All Might murmured, his voice barely audible. Izuku nodded again. "They are my protectors. They obey my will." With the villain subdued, the undead army began to disperse, fading back into the shadows from whence they came. The remaining heroes, their faces a mixture of relief and bewilderment, could only watch in silence. All Might approached Izuku, his expression serious. "Young man, your quirk it is incredibly powerful. And unusual." Izuku met his gaze, his own eyes calm and steady. "I know. What is your name?" All Might asked. "Midoriya Izuku." All Might extended a hand, his smile returning, albeit a bit more subdued than usual. "Midoriya Shunin, you possess a remarkable quirk. It has the potential for great good. I sense a strong heart within you, a longing to protect." Izuku hesitated for a moment, then took All Might's hand. He felt a strange warmth emanating from the hero, a sense of pure, unadulterated goodness. He knew, instinctively, that All Might was different from the others, that he genuinely cared about people. "Thank you, All Might," Izuku said, his voice softer than usual. I want to be a hero. But my quirk it scares people." All Might's smile widened, his eyes twinkling. "The nature of a quirk does not define the hero, Midoriya Shonin. It is the heart, the will, the actions that truly matter. You have shown today that you possess the heart of a hero, even if your quirk is unconventional. He squeezed Izuku's hand gently. Don't let the fear of others deter you. Embrace your power, control it, and use it to protect those in need. That is the path of a true hero. As All Might turned to address the crowd and the other heroes, Izuku stood there, his heart filled with a strange mix of hope and determination. All Might's words resonated within him, a beacon of light in the darkness that surrounded his quirk. He knew that his path would be different, that he would face prejudice and misunderstanding. But for the first time, he felt a flicker of acceptance, a sense that perhaps, just perhaps, he could find his place in this world of heroes, even with the power of necromancy at his fingertips. The encounter with All Might marked a turning point in Izuku's life. It solidified his resolve to become a hero, not to prove others wrong, but to fulfill the potential he knew resided within him. He continued to train, honing his control over his undead, exploring the nuances of his quirk. He learned to summon more diverse and powerful entities, creatures of shadow and bone, spectral warriors and monstrous beasts. He delved deeper into the mysteries of necromancy, uncovering ancient texts and forgotten lore, though he remained cautious, wary of the darker aspects of his power. He also began to refine his combat skills, recognizing that his undead were not his only weapon. He trained in martial arts, developing a fluid and defensive style that complemented his quirk. He learned to use the shadows to his advantage, moving with stealth and agility, becoming a MSTR of both offense and defense. His reputation, however, continued to precede him. While All Might's words had given him hope, the general public remained wary of his quirk. News reports often sensationalized his abilities, portraying him as a dark and mysterious figure, a harbinger of death. He ignored the negativity, focusing on his training and his goal. He knew that action spoke louder than words, that the only way to change perceptions was to prove himself through his deeds. And so, Izuku Midoriya, the boy with the necromancer quirk, continued to walk his own path, a path shrouded in shadow, yet illuminated by the unwavering light of his heroic heart. Chapter 3. The Price of Salvation. The aftermath of the villain attack was a whirlwind of media frenzy and public debate. The images of Izuku's undead army, a tide of skeletal warriors and shadowy beasts, dominated the news cycle. Commentators debated the ethics of his quirk, some praising his heroism, others condemning his power as inherently villainous. All Might, in an attempt to quell the rising tide of fear and prejudice, gave a televised interview. He spoke of Izuku's courage, his selflessness, and the undeniable fact that he had saved countless lives. He emphasized the importance of judging individuals by their actions, not by the nature of their quirks. Young Midoriya, All Might declared, his voice booming with conviction, possesses a heart of gold. His quirk may be unconventional, but his intentions are pure. He is a hero in the making, and I have no doubt that he will one day stand among the greatest. His words carried weight, and they did have a positive impact. Some people began to see Izuku in a new light, their fear tempered by respect for his actions. But the controversy remained, a simmering undercurrent of unease that followed Izuku wherever he went. He watched the interview in his small apartment, his expression unreadable. All Might's words warmed him, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. But he also felt a sense of unease. He knew that his quirk was different, that it challenged the very definition of heroism. He wondered if he truly deserved All Might's praise. A few days later, fate intervened. Izuku was walking home from school when he saw him. Not the towering figure of All Might, the symbol of peace, but a gaunt, frail man, his once muscular frame withered and his eyes filled with a weariness that belied his forced smile. It was All Might, in his true form. Izuku froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He had heard rumors, whispers of All Might's declining health, but he had never truly believed them. To see the invincible hero reduced to this, it was a shock, a harsh reminder of the fragility of even the greatest power. All Might, noticing Izuku, offered a weak smile. "Young Midoriya, it's good to see you again." His voice was raspy, strained. Izuku approached cautiously, his mind racing. He had so many questions, so much he wanted to say. But the words caught in his throat. "All Might, what happened?" He finally managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper. All Might sighed, his gaze drifting towards the setting sun. It's a long story, Midoriya Shonen. A battle long ago it took its toll. I can only maintain my hero form for a few hours a day now. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that sent a shiver down Izuku's spine. But enough about me. I wanted to thank you again for your bravery. You saved so many lives that day. Izuku shook his head. It was nothing. I couldn't stand by and watch them get hurt. He hesitated, then his eyes fell on All Might's side, where his shirt was stained with a dark, ominous patch. You're bleeding. All Might chuckled weakly. An old wound. It flares up from time to time. Nothing to worry about. But Izuku could feel it. The faint but unmistakable scent of BLD, the residue of pain clinging to the air. He could sense the damage within All Might's body, the ravaged tissues, the weakened organs. An idea sparked in his mind, a dangerous, reckless idea. He knew the risks, the potential consequences, but he couldn't ignore the opportunity to help his hero. All Might, he said, his voice firm, I can heal you. All Might's eyes widened in surprise. Heal me. Midoriya Shonen, I appreciate the offer. But, I can, Izuku insisted. My quirk, it's not just about controlling the dead. It's about manipulating life force, negative energy. I've been experimenting. I think I can use it to mend wounds. All Might looked at him, his expression a mixture of disbelief and hope. Midoriya Shonen, I don't know if that's wise. Your quirk is powerful, but it's also unpredictable. Dark healing, it's a dangerous path. I know the risks, Izuku said, his voice unwavering. But I have to try. You saved so many people, All Might. It's my turn to repay you. He stepped closer, his eyes glowing with an inner light. He reached out his hand, and All Might, after a moment of hesitation, placed his own hand in Izuku's. A dark energy flowed from Izuku, a chilling current that pulsed through All Might's body. It felt strange, unnatural, a cold fire that both soothed and burned. Izuku focused, his mind reaching into the depths of All Might's injuries. He saw the torn muscles, the damaged tissues, the internal bleeding. He directed the dark energy, weaving it into the fabric of All Might's being, coaxing the damaged cells to repair themselves. It was a delicate process, a tightrope walk between healing and harm. The dark energy, while capable of mending wounds, could also be destructive if not properly controlled. Izuku poured all his concentration into the task, his body trembling with the effort. The bleeding stopped. The torn tissues began to knit back together. The damaged organs started to function again. But the process was unsettling. All Might's body shuddered, his face contorted in pain and a strange, almost ecstatic relief. Izuku could feel the changes within him, the restoration of his internal structure. He could also sense something else, something missing. The years of damage, the strain of one for all. It had left a mark on All Might's body, a permanent scar. The dark healing could mend the wounds, but it couldn't undo the past. It could restore function, but it couldn't fully resurrect the vitality and strength that had once defined All Might. After what felt like an eternity, Izuku pulled back his hand. All Might stood there, breathing heavily, his face pale but his eyes clear. I feel better, he said, his voice stronger. The pain, it's gone. Thank you, Midoriya Shonen. But Izuku shook his head. It's not a complete cure, All Might. The damage, it's still there. You'll need to train, to rebuild your strength. But the bleeding has stopped, and your body is stable. He looked at All Might, his expression troubled. Dark healing, it comes with a price. It can mend, but it can also corrupt. I'm not sure if I should have done that. All Might placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, his gaze warm and reassuring. You saved me, Midoriya Shonen. You used your quirk to do good. That's all that matters. He paused, then added, but you're right. Dark healing, it's a dangerous path. You must be careful. You must always remember that your power is a tool, not a MSTR. As they parted ways, Izuku felt a profound sense of unease. He had helped All Might, but he had also crossed a line. He had delved deeper into the darker aspects of his quirk, and the experience had left him shaken. He knew that he couldn't turn back, that he had to accept the full extent of his power. But he also knew that he had to tread carefully, to walk the tightrope between light and darkness, between healing and destruction. The encounter with All Might, and the use of dark healing, marked another turning point in Izuku's journey. It forced him to confront the complexities of his quirk, the potential for both good and evil that resided within him. He continued to train, to refine his control, to explore the limits of his abilities. But he also became more cautious, more aware of the consequences of his actions. He learned to wield his power with precision and restraint, always mindful of the delicate balance between life and death. And so, Izuku Midoriya, the boy with the necromancer quirk, continued to walk his own path, a path fraught with danger and uncertainty, but guided by the unwavering light of his heroic heart. Chapter 4. The Gates of Heroes and the Shadow Host. The day of the UA entrance exam dawned with a nervous energy that crackled in the air. Thousands of aspiring heroes had gathered outside the massive gates of UA High School, their faces a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Izuku stood slightly apart from the throng, his usual stoic expression betraying a hint of anticipation. He wore a simple, dark tracksuit, a stark contrast to the more flamboyant hero costumes some of the other examinees sported. The sheer number of quirks on display was overwhelming. He saw a girl with large, butterfly-like wings fluttering nervously, a boar whose arms had transformed into massive drills, and another who seemed to be constantly emitting a faint electrical charge. Izuku kept his gaze steady, his senses subtly probing the crowd, a faint awareness of the life force signatures around him. Inside the massive auditorium, Present Mike's booming voice filled the space, his enthusiastic explanation of the practical exam echoing through the hall. Izuku listened intently, his mind already strategizing. The mock cityscape, the various point values assigned to the different types of robotic villains, it was all information he was processing, calculating. He noted the mention of the zero-pointer, the massive, seemingly invincible robot that offered no points but served as an obstacle. A flicker of dark energy pulsed within him. He had a plan for that, a risky one, but potentially decisive. As the examinees were herded onto the massive training grounds, a sprawling replica of a city with various terrains and obstacles, Izuku took a deep breath. The air hummed with anticipation, the scent of metal and freshly laid asphalt filling his nostrils. "All right, examinees." Present Mike's voice blared through the speakers. "The practical exam has begun. Go forth and show us what you've got." The gates opened, and a surge of students rushed into the mock city, eager to start accumulating points. Izuku, however, remained near the starting line for a moment, his eyes closed, his senses reaching out. He could feel the faint tremors beneath the artificial ground, the distant whirring of the robots activating. He extended his hands, palms facing the ground, and unleashed the power that had been steadily building within him. The shadows around him deepened, swirling and coalescing like a living entity. A faint, chilling mist began to rise from the ground, carrying with it the faint scent of turned earth and something ancient. From the depths of this swirling darkness, they began to emerge. Not the sleek, metallic forms of the training robots, but figures ripped straight from the pages of forgotten lore. Grotesque ogres with gnarled clubs, their tusks yellowed and sharp. Lied, silent goblins wielding crude but effective blades. Towering trolls with moss-covered skin and eyes that glowed with malevolent intelligence. The spectral forms of elven archers, their ethereal bows already drawn, their arrows shimmering with otherworldly energy. Heavily armored human warriors, their ancient swords stained with the rust of ages. And lumbering giants, their footsteps shaking the ground. A collective gasp rippled through the other examinees who had yet to venture far. They stared in disbelief, their initial excitement replaced by a mixture of awe and terror. This wasn't what they had expected. And then, the ground trembled more violently as an immense shadow fell over the cityscape. From a swirling darkness, a colossal dragon unfolded its leathery wings, its scales the color of polished obsidian, its eyes glowing with malevolent yellow light. Necrotic energy crackled around its form, and skeletal remnants adorned its horns and wingtips. This was the creature from Izuku's imagination, the embodiment of ancient dread. Izuku stepped forward, his gaze meeting the glowing eyes of the dragon. A faint smile touched his lips as he placed a hand on its snout. With a fluid motion, He vaulted onto its back, settling comfortably between its massive wings. A wave of necrotic aura emanated from Izuku, a palpable chill that spread through the air. It wasn't overtly hostile, but it carried the undeniable weight of death and decay, causing the robots to momentarily stutter and flicker as their systems registered the unusual energy. "Go!" Izuku commanded, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority. With a powerful beat of its wings, the dragon launched into the air, carrying Izuku high above the cityscape. Below, his undead army surged forward, a tide of monstrous beings descending upon the unsuspecting robots. The scene that unfolded was unlike anything the UA teachers observing from the monitoring room had ever witnessed. Principal Nezu, his sharp eyes gleaming with intrigue, leaned forward. Eraserhead, his expression typically stoic, actually blinked in surprise. Midnight covered her mouth with a hand, a mixture of shock and fascination in her eyes. Even All Might, in his skeletal form, sat up straighter, his gaze fixed on the screen displaying Izuku and his terrifying retinue. What is this?" Cementos murmured, his usually calm demeanor slightly ruffled. "Midoriyakun's quirk," All Might replied, his voice a low rumble. "Necromancy, but on a scale I never imagined." The robots, designed to engage living targets, seemed momentarily confused by the onslaught of the undead. The ogre smashed them with brute force, the goblins swarmed them with surprising agility, the trolls ripped them apart with their bare hands, and the spectral arrows of the elven archers passed through their armor as if it were mere air. The armored human warriors, surprisingly skilled with their ancient weaponry, engaged the robots in close combat, their movements fluid and deadly. "He summoned an army?" Present Mike stammered, his usual energetic commentary replaced by stunned disbelief. "And is that a dragon?" Nezu chuckled softly. "Indeed. It seems young Midoriya's imagination is as potent as his quirk." Down in the mock city, chaos reigned. The robots, programmed for combat against individual students with various quirks, were completely overwhelmed by the sheer number and variety of Izuku's summoned beings. Meanwhile, Izuku, riding his dragon, surveyed the cityscape from above. He could see other students engaging the robots, some with impressive displays of power. He also noticed the few who were struggling, either overwhelmed by the number of enemies or possessing quirks less suited for direct combat. He spotted a student with wild, purple hair being cornered by 3 two-point robots. The student seemed to be using some form of mental quirk, his eyes glowing intensely, but he was clearly on the defensive. "Take us there," Izuku commanded the dragon. With a powerful swoop, the dragon descended, landing near the struggling student. Izuku dismounted, the ground shaking slightly upon its landing. The purple-haired student, startled by the sudden appearance of the massive dragon, stumbled backward. His eyes widened in alarm as Izuku approached. "You seem to be having trouble," Izuku said, his voice flat but not unkind. He reached into a pouch at his side and withdrew a long, slender bone, intricately carved and radiating a faint, dark energy. "Here, take this." The student stared at the bone, his expression wary. "What is it?" "A bone sword," Izuku replied. "It's more durable than it looks. Use it to defend yourself." The student hesitantly took the bone sword. It felt surprisingly light but possessed a strange, unsettling weight. As he gripped it, a faint surge of dark energy seemed to flow into him, sharpening his focus. "My name is Shinso Hitoshi," the student said, his voice low. "Thank you." Izuku nodded curtly. "Midoriya Izuku. Focus on surviving. Points aren't everything." With that, he remounted his dragon, and they soared back into the sky. Shinso stared after them, clutching the bone sword. He felt a strange sense of determination bloom within him. Even without a flashy offensive quirk, perhaps he could still find a way to pass. Meanwhile, on the ground, Ochako Uruka was having a decidedly different experience. Her zero-gravity quirk, usually quite effective for immobilizing and launching objects, was proving useless against the non-living robots. She zipped around the cityscape, touching robot after robot, only to watch them remain firmly rooted to the ground. Frustration mounted within her. She had come to UA expecting to easily ace the practical exam, relying on her charm and seemingly versatile quirk. The sight of other students, Like the boy with the explosions and the girl creating giant objects, racking up points with ease only fueled her resentment. Her gaze fell upon the horde of monstrous creatures tearing through the robots. She scowled. That creepy boy with the death quirk was hogging all the points. It wasn't fair. He should be using his quirk to help everyone, not just summoning an army for himself. "Hey!" she yelled, trying to get Izuku's attention as his dragon flew overhead. "You! The zombie kid! Share some of those points." Izuku, hearing her shout, glanced down. He saw the angry expression on her face, the entitled glare in her eyes. He felt a flicker of annoyance. He was focused on ensuring his own success and subtly helping those who genuinely seemed to need it. Her demand felt unwarranted. He simply turned away, directing his dragon towards another area of the city where he had sensed a group of students struggling against a particularly large cluster of robots. Uruka stomped her foot in frustration. "Selfish," she muttered under her breath. "He's probably cheating anyway, summoning all those creepy things." The teachers in the monitoring room continued to observe Izuku's performance with a mixture of astonishment and concern. "He's certainly efficient," Snipe commented, adjusting his mask. "He's taking down a large number of robots without even breaking a sweat." "But is it heroic?" Power Loader questioned, his brow furrowed. "He's not directly engaging the enemy himself. He's relying entirely on his summons." "He did help that Shinso kid," Midnight pointed out. "And his undead haven't attacked any of the other examinees. They seem to be solely focused on the robots." Nezu tapped his chin thoughtfully. "His approach is unconventional, to say the least. But he is neutralizing threats and, in his own way, ensuring the safety of the other students. It raises interesting questions about the nature of heroism." Just as the exam was nearing its end, a deafening roar echoed through the cityscape. The ground began to tremble violently as the massive form of the zero-pointer lumbered into view. Panic erupted among the remaining students, many of whom immediately began to flee. Izuku, still airborne on his dragon, observed the colossal robot. Its sheer size was intimidating, but he felt no fear, only a cold calculation. This was the final obstacle, the one designed to test their ability to react in the face of overwhelming danger. He dismounted his dragon, landing on a nearby rooftop. He could feel the eyes of the teachers and the remaining students on him. This was his moment to make a statement. He closed his eyes, focusing his inner energy. The necrotic aura around him intensified, swirling like a visible miasma. He reached deep within himself, not to summon his undead, but to manipulate the very earth, to channel the raw, negative energy that flowed through him. The ground beneath the zero-pointer began to crack. Fissures snaked across the pavement, widening and deepening. A dark energy pulsed from these cracks, coalescing into a tangible force. With a final, focused exhalation, Izuku unleashed his power. From the earth directly beneath the zero-pointer, a colossal pillar of bone erupted with explosive force. It was not a natural bone, but something formed from pure, condensed necrotic energy, its surface jagged and sharp, its tip honed to a deadly point. The bone pillar shot upwards with incredible speed, piercing through the zero-pointer's metallic underbelly and tearing through its chest cavity. Sparks flew, and the massive robot shuddered violently, its momentum halting abruptly. With a deafening crash, it toppled sideways, its immense weight shaking the entire mock city. Silence descended, broken only by the groans of the fallen robot and the ragged breaths of the stunned examinees. Izuku stood on the rooftop, his chest heaving slightly, the remnants of dark energy swirling around him before dissipating into the air. In the monitoring room, the teachers were speechless. Even Eraserhead's eyes were wide with disbelief. What was that?" Midnight finally whispered, her voice filled with awe and a hint of fear. "That," Nezu said slowly, a wide, almost manic grin spreading across his face, was power. Unadulterated, terrifying power. All Might simply stared at the screen, his expression a complex mix of shock, concern, and a dawning realization of the true potential and the inherent dangers of Izuku Midoriya's quirk. The UA entrance exam had come to an end, leaving behind a trail of shattered robots and stunned silence. One student, the boy who commanded the dead and wielded the very essence of death, had left an indelible mark on the future of heroism. The gates of UA had opened, and the shadow host had arrived. Chapter 5, Interrogation and Entitlement. In the shadow of the exam, the echoes of the zero-pointers fall still reverberated through the artificial cityscape as the practical exam officially concluded. A collective sigh of relief and nervous chatter rippled through the remaining examinees. Izuku, having dismissed his dragon and allowed his remaining undead to dissipate back into shadow, began to make his way towards the designated exit. He felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and a quiet sense of satisfaction. He had done what he needed to do, perhaps even more. Before he could reach the edge of the training grounds, a shrill voice cut through the lingering murmur. "Hey! You! The creepy zombie kid!" Izuku stopped, a flicker of annoyance crossing his usually impassive features. He turned to see the pink-cheeked girl, Uruka, stomping towards him, her expression a mask of indignant fury. "What do you want?" Izuku asked, his voice flat, devoid of any inflection. He had no patience for unnecessary confrontation. "What do I want?" Uruka shrieked, her voice rising in pitch. "You stole all the points. You summoned that menagerie of horrors and just let them do all the work. That's not fair. You should give me some of your points." Izuku stared at her, a profound sense of boredom washing over him. Her entitlement was baffling. He had utilized his quirk effectively to neutralize threats, the very objective of the exam. Her inability to score points was hardly his responsibility. "I used my quirk to complete the objective," Izuku stated simply, turning to resume his walk. He had no longing to engage in a pointless argument. "No, you didn't," Uruka insisted, grabbing his arm, her grip surprisingly strong despite her seemingly bubbly demeanor. "You just stood there and let your pets do everything. That's not heroic. Real heroes fight for themselves." Izuku stopped again, his gaze hardening slightly. He didn't appreciate being touched, especially by someone so demanding. A faint wisp of dark energy flickered around his hand. "My quirk allows me to command the diseased and other entities," he said, his voice low and carrying a subtle undercurrent of warning. "They are an extension of my will. I neutralized more threats than likely anyone else here. Your lack of preparedness is not my concern." He gently but firmly removed her hand from his arm. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm leaving." He turned and continued walking, ignoring Uruka's increasingly loud and petulant protests. "It's not fair. You should share. My family needs the money. This is my only chance." Her cries faded behind him as he reached the exit. Just as he was about to step through the gate, a voice called out, "Midoriya Izuku-kun." Izuku turned to see a tall, gaunt man with long, black hair that seemed to defy gravity and tired eyes. "Aizawa Shota, Eraserhead, one of the UA teachers." "Yes," Izuku replied, his expression neutral. "Principal Nezu would like to have a word with you," Aizawa said, his gaze sharp and assessing. "Please follow me." Izuku nodded, a sense of inevitability washing over him. He had expected some kind of follow-up regarding his unique performance. He followed Aizawa, the teacher leading him back towards the main building. They walked in silence through the emptying training grounds, the remnants of the destroyed robot scattered across the landscape. Aizawa's eyes scanned the area, occasionally lingering on the deep gouges left by Izuku's larger undead and a massive crater where the bone pillar had erupted. They reached a nondescript door and Aizawa led Izuku into a spacious observation room. Several figures were already present, the teachers who had been monitoring the exam. Principal Nezu, perched on a chair that seemed too large for him, offered a polite smile. All Might, in his skeletal form, sat in a corner, his expression thoughtful. Midnight, Cementos, Snipe, and Power Loader were also present, their gazes fixed on Izuku as he entered. "Ah, Midoriya-kun. Please, have a seat," Nezu chirped, gesturing to an empty chair. Izuku sat, his posture straight, his hands resting calmly in his lap. He met each of their gazes in turn, his own unwavering. "Midoriya-kun," Nezu began, his tone polite but inquisitive. "Your quirk is quite remarkable. We've never encountered anything quite like it." "It is a necromancy-type quirk," Izuku stated simply, preempting their questions. "Indeed," Nezu said, his eyes gleaming with intellectual curiosity. But its applications seem far broader than simple reanimation. You summoned creatures that do not appear to be from this world. Could you elaborate on that? Izuku hesitated for a moment. He himself didn't fully understand the origin of his more fantastical summons. I am not entirely sure where they come from, he admitted, his voice even. They manifest at my command, drawn from somewhere else. My control over them is absolute, and they do not attack the living unless I will it. Aizawa's gaze narrowed slightly. You said, somewhere else. Do you have any idea what that entails? Izuku shook his head. No. It is like reaching into a void and pulling forth what is needed. The forms vary. Sometimes they are skeletal, sometimes more substantial. Their abilities also differ. Midnight leaned forward, her interest piqued. You mentioned controlling the dead. What exactly can you do? Izuku provided a concise but comprehensive list of his abilities, drawing upon the information he had learned and the skills he had honed over the years. I can raise and animate skeletal structures and diseased organic matter, creating what are commonly known as skeletons and zombies. I can also create more powerful forms of undead, though their specific abilities vary. I exert complete mental control over them, directing their actions. I can strengthen their physical capabilities and even repair minor damage to their forms using necrotic energy. I can also dispel my own undead or counter the animation of others, theoretically. I can create and command large numbers of undead simultaneously, though I rarely see the need for such a large-scale deployment. He paused, then continued, delving into the more esoteric aspects of his quirk. Beyond simple animation, I can manipulate life force and negative energy. I can, theoretically, drain life force, though I have never practiced this on a living being. I can induce withering and decay through focused bursts of necrotic energy. My attacks inflict necrotic damage, which can be difficult to heal. I possess a natural resistance to death, disease, and negative energy. I can sense the presence of living beings and areas where death has recently occurred. I can sometimes perceive faint echoes of spirits, though true communication is still beyond my grasp. I have experimented with manipulating souls on a rudimentary level, though I find the practice distasteful. He then touched upon the darker applications, his tone remaining clinical and detached. Through focused application of negative energy, I can achieve a form of dark healing, though it carries risks. I passively emit a necrotic aura, which can cause discomfort in living beings. I can channel dark magic through spells and rituals. Though my knowledge in this area is largely theoretical, I can create constructs from bone and shadow, imbue objects with dark energy, and potentially inflict curses, though I have never used the latter on another person. Shadow magic is a natural extension of my abilities, allowing for manipulation of darkness for various purposes. I have a theoretical understanding of BLD magic and the summoning of darker entities, but I have never engaged in these practices. He also mentioned the more specialized applications he had discovered. I can infuse my undead with dark animation, enhancing their abilities with potent dark magic. I can control them remotely using shadow puppetry. The bone pillar I used against the zero-pointer was an example of focused bone magic imbued with necrotic energy. I have also experienced fragmented divinations related to death. He deliberately omitted any mention of potential immortality or mind control, feeling those aspects were either too theoretical or too ethically questionable to discuss openly. The teachers listened intently, their expressions ranging from fascinated to concerned. All Might's gaze was particularly intense, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. The scale of your power is immense, Midoriya Shonen, he said finally, his voice low. And the nature of it could easily be perceived as villainous. That is a perception I am aware of, Izuku replied calmly. However, a quirk's nature does not dictate its user's morality. I intend to use my power to protect the innocent. Aizawa, who had been observing Izuku with a keen intensity, finally spoke. Your control seems absolute. Your summons did not deviate from your commands, nor did they target any of the other examinees. That level of DSPLN is unusual for someone your age. I have been practicing since I was 4, Izuku explained. Control is paramount. Nezu steepled his fingers, his gaze sharp. You mentioned a negligible stamina cost for your quirk. How is that possible? I do not know, Izuku admitted. The drain is so minimal it is almost imperceptible. It is as if the energy source is external, or perhaps tied to my connection to the realm of death itself. The teachers exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. This was a quirk unlike anything they had ever encountered. Its potential was staggering, but so were the potential risks. Midoriya-kun, Nezu said, his tone becoming more serious, we appreciate your candor. Your performance in the practical exam was exceptional, in terms of points acquired and threats neutralized. However, the nature of your quirk raises some concerns regarding public perception and your interactions with other heroes. I understand, Izuku replied, his expression unwavering. I am prepared for scrutiny. I will prove through my actions that my intentions are heroic. Aizawa gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He saw a certain kinship in Izuku's stoic demeanor and his absolute control over his unusual power. He reminded Aizawa of himself, in a strange, morbid way. We will be in touch regarding the results of the exam, Nezu concluded, his smile returning. Thank you for your time, Midoriya-kun. Izuku stood, offering a polite bow to the teachers before following Aizawa out of the observation room. As Izuku left the UA grounds, he couldn't shake the feeling of being thoroughly scrutinized, dissected under their analytical gazes. He knew his path to becoming a hero would be more challenging than most, paved with prejudice and fear. But All Might's earlier words of encouragement echoed in his mind, a small beacon of hope in the encroaching shadows. Meanwhile, back in the vicinity of the training grounds, Uruka was still fuming. She had accosted a few of the other examinees, trying to garner sympathy and support for her claim that Izuku had been unfair. Most of them, however, were either too preoccupied with their own results or too unnerved by the memory of Izuku's monstrous army to offer much more than awkward shrugs and hurried departures. Driven by a sense of injustice and her perceived need for points, Uruka decided to take her complaint directly to the teachers. She marched into the main building, her pink cheeks flushed with indignation, and demanded to speak to someone in charge. She was eventually directed to the same observation room Izuku had just vacated. The teachers were still there, reviewing data and discussing the implications of Izuku's quirk. Excuse me, Uruka announced, barging into the room, her hands on her hips. I need to report that creepy zombie kid. He cheated. He used his quirk to summon all those monsters and stole all the points. It's not fair. And I deserve some of those points because I couldn't even find any robots to fight. The teachers turned to look at her, their expressions ranging from mild surprise to utter disbelief. Nezu blinked slowly, his usual cheerfulness absent. Are you referring to Midoriya Izuku-kun? He asked, his voice dangerously calm. Yes, that's him. He just stood there while his minions did all the work. That's not heroic at all. I actually tried to fight the robots, but they were all busy with his zombies. Uruka continued her tirade, oblivious to the increasingly icy stares of the teachers. Aizawa's eyes narrowed to slits, his capture weapon twitching slightly around his neck. Midnight's smile had vanished, replaced by a look of cold disapproval. Even the usually jovial present might look taken aback. Young lady, Aizawa said, his voice low and dangerous. The objective of the practical exam was to neutralize robotic villains and rescue any simulated civilians. Midoriya-kun accomplished this with remarkable efficiency and control. His summons targeted only the robots and, in fact, indirectly protected other examinees. He followed the rules of the exam. But it's not fair. Uruka stammered, wilting slightly under their collective gaze. My quirk doesn't work on robots. I couldn't get any points. That is unfortunate, Nezu said, his tone leaving no room for argument. However, the exam tests a student's ability to adapt and utilize their quirk effectively in a given scenario. Midoriya-kun demonstrated exceptional adaptability and power. Your inability to score points is not his responsibility, nor does it constitute cheating on his part. He fixed her with a sharp look. Furthermore, your demand for his points is presumptuous and entitled. Heroism is about selflessness and protecting others, not about demanding the fruits of someone else's LBR. Midnight stepped forward, her voice laced with a sharp edge. You should be focusing on your own performance and reflecting on how you could have approached the exam differently, rather than blaming another student for your own shortcomings. Now, Aizawa said, his voice leaving no room for further discussion, we have important work to do in evaluating the examinees. Please leave. Uruka, thoroughly chastised and realizing the futility of her complaints, mumbled an apology and hastily retreated from the observation room, her dreams of easy points and quick riches dissolving into the harsh reality of her own performance. The teachers turned back to their monitors, the image of Izuku's skeletal army and the colossal bone pillars still fresh in their minds. The discussion shifted back to the implications of his extraordinary quirk and the potential role he could play in the future of heroism. One thing was certain, Izuku Midoriya had made a powerful and unforgettable first impression. The shadow he cast was long, and the world of heroes would never be quite the same. Chapter 6, Shadows Amongst Heroes. A class divided the first day at UA High School was a maelstrom of emotions. Excitement, anxiety, and a palpable sense of competition hung heavy in the air as Class 1 assembled in their designated classroom. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the faces of the students, each a unique blend of hope and trepidation. Izuku stood near the back, his gaze sweeping across the room. The initial introductions had been a blur of names and quirks, a cacophony of youthful energy. He noted the sharp contrasts between the students, the explosive Bakugo, radiating a volatile confidence, the stoic Todoroki, his heterochromatic eyes hinting at a complex inner world, the energetic Kirishima, his smile as bright as his red hair, and the imposing Ida, his movements precise and disciplined. His gaze lingered on Shinso, who sat quietly beside him. There was a shared understanding in their silence, a recognition of the shadows they carried within. Izuku felt a strange sense of camaraderie with the purple-haired boy, a connection forged in the crucible of the entrance exam. He also couldn't help but notice the absence of a certain pink-cheeked girl. Uruka's absence was a stark reminder of the harsh realities of the hero course. Her entitled outburst after the exam had left a sour taste in Izuku's mouth, a glimpse into a personality that seemed to prioritize personal gain over genuine heroism. As Aizawa Sensei entered the classroom, his lethargic demeanor and disheveled appearance immediately commanded attention. His words were blunt and direct, a stark contrast to the usual enthusiasm that permeated the school. He wasted no time in setting the tone for the year. This was not a playground, but a training ground for future heroes. All right, brats, Aizawa Sensei drawled, his voice laced with a hint of exhaustion. Today, we're going to skip the formalities and get straight to business. We're having a quirk apprehension test. A collective groan rippled through the class. The idea of immediately being put to the test, especially after the grueling entrance exam, was met with varying degrees of enthusiasm. What? A quirk apprehension test? Are you serious? Whined Kaminari, his electric yellow hair sparking with agitation. We just got here. If you want to be heroes, Aizawa Sensei retorted, his eyes glowing red, you don't have time for complaints. Now, everyone outside. The class filed out onto the training grounds, the atmosphere thick with anticipation and a hint of dread. Aizawa Sensei explained the rules. Each student would perform a series of basic physical tests, but with the added twist of being allowed to use their quirks. Bakugo stepped up first for the ball throw, his eyes burning with competitive fire. He hurled the ball with a deafening explosion, the force of his quirk propelling it to an astonishing distance. Die, he roared, his voice filled with manic energy. The class erupted in cheers and gasps, their reactions a mixture of awe and intimidation. 2 meters. Aizawa Sensei announced, his voice devoid of emotion. Not bad, Bakugo. The other students followed, each showcasing their unique abilities. Kirishima hardened his skin, throwing the ball with brute strength. Yaoyorozu created a cannon, launching the ball with calculated precision. Tokoyami used dark shadow to propel the ball with a shadowy tendril. As the tests progressed, the atmosphere became increasingly tense. The students were eager to prove themselves, to establish their place among their peers. When it was Izuku's turn for the ball throw, a hush fell over the group. He stepped forward, his expression calm, his eyes glowing with a faint, inner light. The necrotic aura around him seemed to intensify, a subtle chill that sent a shiver down the spines of some of his classmates. He held the ball in his hand, his fingers tracing its smooth surface. He focused his intent, channeling his dark magic. He didn't visualize throwing the ball. Instead, he imagined it being pulled forward, propelled by an unseen force. He released the ball. It didn't fly in a conventional arc. It hovered for a moment, suspended in midair, as if caught in a gravitational anomaly. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, it shot forward, a dark streak against the clear blue sky. The ball continued to accelerate, defying the laws of physics. It smashed into the measuring device with a force that shattered the equipment and sent a shockwave rippling through the ground. The readings went haywire, the digital display flashing erratically before finally crashing. Silence descended upon the training grounds, broken only by the whistling wind and the stunned gasps of the students. Even Aizawa Sensei seemed momentarily speechless. What was that? Kaminari stammered, his eyes wide with disbelief. He didn't even throw it. It just went. It was like dark magic, Sero whispered, his gaze fixed on Izuku with a mixture of fear and fascination. Like something out of a horror movie. That was intense, Mina said, her voice trembling slightly. His quirk is way scarier than I thought. Bakugo, despite his usual bravado, stared at Izuku with a flicker of unease in his crimson eyes. He had never seen power like that, a force that seemed to defy explanation. TCH, he scoffed, trying to regain his composure. It's just a quirk, Deku. A creepy one, but still just a quirk. Ida, ever the stickler for rules, adjusted his glasses. Midoriya-kun, that was unconventional. It appears you have exceeded the limitations of the equipment. Yaoyorozu, her expression thoughtful, analyzed Izuku's technique. He didn't use any physical force. It was as if he manipulated the very fabric of reality to propel the ball. Tokoyami, his dark eyes gleaming in the shadow of his bird-like head, nodded slowly. He wields a power that resonates with the shadows, a force that transcends the physical realm. Todoroki, his heterochromatic eyes narrowed, observed Izuku with a calculating gaze. He sensed the darkness within the boy, a power that both intrigued and disturbed him. His control is unsettling. He seems to be able to wield that power with effortless precision. Shinso, however, remained silent, his gaze fixed on Izuku with a strange sense of recognition. He felt a faint echo of that power within himself, a whisper of the shadows that lurked in the recesses of his own mind. Aizawa Sensei, after a long moment of silence, cleared his throat. All right, Midoriya. I think we've established that you have a potent quirk. Let's try not to destroy any more equipment, shall we? Izuku nodded, his expression unchanged. Understood, Aizawa Sensei. The quirk apprehension test continued, each student showcasing their unique abilities. Izuku's performance remained consistently impressive, though he deliberately restrained himself, not wanting to further alarm his classmates. He excelled in the agility test, his movements fluid and graceful, as if he were dancing with the shadows. He demonstrated surprising strength in the grip test, his touch leaving a faint chill on the metal device. His reaction time was almost instantaneous, his reflexes honed to a razor's edge. During the rescue exercise, he displayed a strategic mind and an almost preternatural awareness of his surroundings. He quickly identified the injured student and navigated the obstacle course with an airy efficiency. As the day progressed, the initial apprehension towards Izuku began to evolve into a complex mix of respect, curiosity, and lingering unease. His power was undeniable, but its nature remained unsettling. He was an enigma, a walking paradox, a hero with the power of a villain. At lunch, Izuku found himself drawn to Shinso, Tokoyami, and Todoroki. They sat together at a secluded table, their conversations quiet and introspective. There was a shared understanding in their silence, a recognition of the weight they carried, the shadows that clung to their souls. Your quirk is fascinating, Midoriya, Yaoyorozu said, approaching their table, her expression curious. It seems to defy the conventional understanding of quirks. It is a necromancy-type quirk, Izuku replied, his voice flat. It allows me to manipulate the forces of life and death. But it's so dark, Kaminari interjected, his voice hesitant. It feels wrong. Power is neither good nor evil, Izuku countered, his gaze hardening slightly. It is the wielder's intent that determines its morality. He has a point, Tokoyami said, his voice deep and resonant. Darkness is not inherently malevolent. It is simply a force, like any other. But it's still creepy, Zero muttered, shivering slightly. I wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of that power. I find it intriguing, Todoroki said, his heterochromatic eyes fixed on Izuku. You wield a power that most would fear, yet you seem to control it with effortless precision. Control is paramount, Izuku replied, his gaze meeting Todoroki's. Without control, power becomes a destructive force. Shinso, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. There's a resonance to your power, Midoriya. A feeling of ancientness. It's unsettling, but also compelling. Izuku turned to Shinso, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had sensed a similar darkness within the purple-haired boy, a shared understanding of the shadows. I feel it too, Izuku admitted, his voice barely audible. A connection to something beyond. The conversation shifted, delving into deeper topics than the usual chatter of high school students. They discussed the nature of heroism, the burden of power, the complexities of morality. They explored the shadows that lurked within their own souls, the darkness that threatened to consume them. As the days turned into weeks, the dynamic of Class 1- began to solidify. The students formed cliques, alliances, and rivalries. Izuku, however, remained an enigma, a figure on the periphery, observed with a mixture of awe and apprehension. His power was undeniable. He excelled in every class, his control over his quirk reaching new heights. He could summon and command undead with effortless ease, manipulate shadows with breathtaking skill, and channel necrotic energy with terrifying precision. But his aloof demeanor, his quiet intensity, and the ever-present aura of darkness that clung to him kept his classmates at arm's length. They whispered about him in hushed tones, their conversations laced with speculation and fear. He's like a ghost, Mina would say, her voice barely audible. He's always there, but he never really is there. He's scary, Kaminari would mutter, his eyes darting nervously in Izuku's direction. I wouldn't want to get on his bad side. He's just different, Yaoyorozu would say, her expression thoughtful. He's not like the rest of us. Bakugo, despite his initial intimidation, continued to challenge Izuku, his pride refusing to acknowledge the power he sensed within the boy. You think you're so strong, Deku? He would sneer, his voice laced with his usual arrogance. Let's see if you can handle my explosions. Izuku would simply ignore him, his gaze fixed on something distant, something beyond the reach of Bakugo's petty taunts. Only Shinso, Tokoyami, and Todoroki seemed to truly understand him. They sought his company, drawn to the quiet strength and the shared darkness that bound them together. They formed an unlikely trio, the outsiders, the ones who walked a path apart from the rest. And so, Izuku Midoriya, the boy with a necromancer quirk, continued his journey at UA High School, a shadow amongst heroes, a force of nature poised to reshape the very definition of heroism. Necromancer, on hold until I can get some ideas. The tension between Izuku and Bakugo had been simmering for weeks, a volatile undercurrent that threatened to erupt at any moment. Bakugo's pride, wounded by Izuku's power and his aloof demeanor, fueled his resentment. He saw Izuku as a challenge, a rival who needed to be put in his place. The opportunity for a clash presented itself during a combat training exercise. Aizawa Sensei, after a brief explanation of the rules, announced that the students would be paired up for simulated battles. Fate, or perhaps Aizawa Sensei's subtle design, paired Izuku and Bakugo together. A collective gasp swept through the class. The other students knew that this was a recipe for disaster. Bakugo's explosive temper and Izuku's unsettling power created a volatile combination. All right, brats, Aizawa Sensei drawled, his eyes glowing red. The rules are simple. You fight until one of you is incapacitated or yields. No permanent damage, got it. And Midoriya, Bakugo, try to keep the property damage to a minimum. He activated the training arena, a large, enclosed space designed to withstand powerful quirks. Bakugo stepped forward, his eyes burning with manic glee. Finally, he snarled, "I get to show you what I'm made of, Deku. Prepare to eat dirt." Izuku remained calm, his expression impassive. He knew that Bakugo's aggression was a mask for his insecurity. He also knew that he had the power to end this quickly. "Let's get this over with," Izuku said, his voice flat. The match began. Bakugo launched himself forward, unleashing a barrage of explosions. The air crackled with heat and force, the sound deafening. Izuku dodged and weaved through the blasts, his movements fluid and precise. He wasn't trying to attack. He was simply observing, analyzing Bakugo's fighting style. "What's wrong, Deku? Afraid to fight back?" Bakugo taunted, his explosions growing more intense. Izuku remained silent, his eyes glowing with an inner light. He could feel the dark energy within him, the power that yearned to be unleashed. He knew he could easily overwhelm Bakugo with his undead, but he wanted to test his own abilities, to explore the limits of his dark magic. He decided to use a different approach, a more subtle and insidious method. He channeled his energy, weaving a complex web of dark magic. He didn't want to inflict lasting harm, but he wanted to subdue Bakugo, to teach him a lesson in humility. He muttered a silent incantation, his voice a low whisper that only he could hear. Two curses, ancient and potent, began to take effect. The first curse was a curse of slowness. It subtly altered Bakugo's perception of time, making his movements feel sluggish and heavy. He couldn't quite pinpoint it, but he felt as if he were moving through treacle, his reactions dulled, his speed diminished. The second curse was a curse of weakness. It sapped Bakugo's physical strength, making his explosions less powerful, his punches less forceful. He felt a strange lethargy creeping into his limbs, a fatigue that he couldn't explain. Bakugo, oblivious to the dark magic working against him, continued his assault. But his attacks were becoming less effective, his movements less precise. He couldn't understand why he felt so sluggish, so weak. "What's happening to me?" he roared, his voice laced with confusion and frustration. "I feel heavy." Izuku finally moved to attack. He moved with a speed that Bakugo couldn't match, his movements fluid and graceful. He struck Bakugo with precise strikes, targeting his pressure points, his movements designed to disable, not to maim. Bakugo tried to retaliate, but his punches were easily blocked, his explosions easily dodged. He was losing, and he couldn't understand why. You're not even trying." Bakugo gasped, his pride wounded. "What's your quirk, Deku? What are you doing to me?" Izuku remained silent, his expression impassive. He didn't want to reveal the full extent of his dark magic, not yet. He delivered a final, decisive blow, a sharp strike to Bakugo's chest that sent him flying across the arena. Bakugo crashed into the wall, his body limp, his eyes wide with shock. The match was over. Silence descended upon the training arena. The other students stared in disbelief, their faces a mixture of awe and fear. They had never seen Izuku fight like that, with such calculated precision and unsettling power. Bakugo, slowly regaining consciousness, struggled to his feet. He glared at Izuku, his eyes burning with a mixture of rage and humiliation. You cheated," he snarled, his voice hoarse. "You did something to me. You used some kind of dark magic." Izuku remained calm, his expression unchanged. "I used my quirk to its fullest potential," he said, his voice flat. "You were defeated." Aizawa Sensei, after a long moment of silence, stepped forward. "The match is over. Midoriya wins." He surveyed the damage, his gaze lingering on Bakugo's battered form and the faint traces of dark energy that still lingered in the air. He knew that Izuku had held back, that he could have inflicted far more damage if he had truly wanted to. The other students, however, were not so sure. They whispered amongst themselves, their voices laced with apprehension. "That was scary," Mina said, her voice trembling slightly. "He didn't even use his undead. He just did something to Bakugo." "It was like a curse," Zero muttered, his eyes wide. "He made Bakugo slow and weak." "He's too powerful," Kaminari whispered, his voice barely audible. He's like a villain in disguise. Todoroki, his heterochromatic eyes narrowed, observed Izuku with a calculating gaze. He had sensed the dark magic at work, the subtle manipulation of energy that had weakened Bakugo. He felt a chill run down his spine. Shinso, however, remained silent, his gaze fixed on Izuku with a strange sense of understanding. He recognized the darkness, the power that lurked beneath the surface. He also recognized the control, the DSPLN that prevented Izuku from unleashing his full potential. Bakugo, his pride shattered, his body aching, glared at Izuku with a hatred that burned like a fire. "I'll get you for this, Deku," he snarled. "I'll make you pay." Izuku simply turned away, his expression unchanged. He had proven his point. He had shown Bakugo, and the rest of the class, the true extent of his power. As the class dispersed, the tension remained. The shadow of Izuku's dark magic hung heavy in the air, a reminder of the power that lurked within him, a power that both intrigued and terrified his classmates. Chapter 8. The Shadow Falls on the USJ. The trip to the unforeseen simulation joint, USJ, was initially met with a typical blend of excitement and nervous anticipation that permeated Class 1A's outings. The students, still navigating their burgeoning powers and the complexities of hero training, looked forward to the opportunity to test their skills in a controlled environment. As they gathered at the entrance, Aizawa Sensei's usual weary demeanor was slightly more pronounced, a subtle tension in the air that most students didn't pick up on. 13. The space hero greeted them with their characteristic calm and informative introduction to the facility's various rescue scenarios. However, the seemingly normal training session took a dark and abrupt turn. A swirling vortex of shadowy mist materialized in the center of the main plaza, growing rapidly and ominously. From its depths emerged a horde of villains, their menacing presence instantly shifting the atmosphere from one of learning to one of imminent danger. Aizawa Sensei's eyes narrowed, his capture weapon unfurling. 13. Protect the students, he barked, his voice laced with urgency. Those are real villains. Panic rippled through Class 1A. The sudden appearance of such a large number of hostile individuals was a stark and terrifying departure from their simulated exercises. As the villains spread throughout the USJ's various zones, the class was scattered by Kurogiri's warp gate. Izuku found himself, along with Shinso and Yaoyorozu, transported to the flood zone, where murky water stretched as far as the eye could see and several aquatic villains lay in wait. The aquatic villains, their appearances ranging from fish-like to serpentine, grinned menacingly, their intent clear. Yaoyorozu immediately began creating flotation devices, her quick thinking a valuable asset in the chaotic situation. Shinso's expression was grim, his mental quirk less effective against multiple, physically oriented opponents in such an environment. Izuku, however, remained calm, his eyes glowing with a faint, inner light. The scent of danger, the palpable malice emanating from the villains, stirred a familiar power within him. "Stay close," he instructed Shinso and Yaoyorozu, his voice low but firm. He extended his hands, and the murky water around them began to churn. Shadows deepened beneath the surface, and a chilling mist rose from the depths. From the water, they emerged. Not the shambling forms of typical zombies, but more formidable aquatic undead. Skeletal leviathans with glowing eyes and razor-sharp teeth, their bony bodies gliding effortlessly through the water. Spectral figures of drowned sailors, their ethereal forms trailing seaweed and despair. Hulking, monstrous amphibians with webbed claws and an aura of ancient decay. The aquatic villains recoiled in surprise and fear. These were not the heroes they had expected to face. What are those things?" one of the fish-like villains stammered, his bravado dissolving into terror. "My protectors," Izuku stated simply, his voice carrying an undeniable authority. "They will ensure our safety." He directed his undead. The skeletal leviathans lunged, their bony jaws snapping with lethal force. The spectral sailors armed and drifted through the water, their touch inflicting a chilling necrotic energy that weakened the villains. The monstrous amphibians thrashed, their powerful limbs creating whirlpools that disoriented their living counterparts. Yaoyorozu, though initially startled by the sudden appearance of Izuku's undead, quickly adapted, creating weapons and support items to aid in their defense. Shinso, though unable to directly control the undead, used his mental quirk to disorient and momentarily stun the living villains, creating openings for Izuku's forces. The flood zone, initially a dangerous trap, quickly became a death trap for the aquatic villains. Izuku's undead, perfectly adapted to the environment, overwhelmed them with relentless efficiency. Meanwhile, in other zones of the USJ, the rest of Class 1 was facing their own perilous encounters. In the landslide zone, Bakugo and Kirishima fought with their characteristic ferocity against rock-based villains. In the mountain zone, Todoroki's ice and fire clashed against villains with earth manipulation quirks. As the situation escalated, the League of Villains leader, Shigaraki, focused his attention on 13, attempting to incapacitate the space hero with his disintegrating touch. However, before he could make contact, a shadowy tendril shot out from the darkness, lashing against his hand and forcing him to recoil. Izuku, having swiftly dealt with the majority of the aquatic villains, had dispatched one of his shadow-wielding undead to observe the central plaza. Upon witnessing the threat to 13, he acted immediately. The shadowy tendril, an extension of Izuku's shadow magic, was a warning shot. He wouldn't allow 13, a hero dedicated to rescue, to be harmed. Shigaraki, his red eyes narrowed with annoyance, turned his attention to the source of the attack. He spotted the faint silhouette of a shadowy figure lurking near the edge of the flood zone exit. "Nomu," Shigaraki commanded, his voice low and gravelly. The hulking, bird-like creature with exposed muscle tissue turned its blank gaze towards the flood zone. Before the Nomu could fully react, however, the ground around it erupted. Not with rocks or explosions, but with jagged spikes of bone, imbued with a sickly green necrotic energy. The bone magic, unleashed with focused intent, tore through the ground, hindering the Nomu's movement and forcing Shigaraki to retreat slightly. Izuku, having instructed Yaoyorozu and Shinso to secure 13, had arrived at the central plaza, riding atop a skeletal, winged horror, a grotesque fusion of bone and shadow that moved with terrifying speed. The sight of Izuku, perched atop this nightmarish creature, surrounded by a faint aura of death, sent a fresh wave of fear through the assembled villains. You're the brat from the exam?" Shigaraki hissed, his hands twitching. "That disgusting quirk. Your intentions are clear," Izuku stated, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "You seek to harm my classmates and my teachers. That will not happen." He unleashed his undead. Skeletal warriors armed with spectral weapons materialized from the shadows, their movements silent and deadly. Grotesque ghouls with glowing eyes lunged at the lesser villains. Spectral wraiths drifted through the air, their chilling touch draining the villains' life force. The Nomu, however, remained a formidable threat. Its enhanced strength and shock absorption made it impervious to most of Izuku's initial attacks. "Nomu, kill him," Shigaraki ordered, his voice filled with malice. The Nomu charged, its massive fist aimed at Izuku. Before it could connect, a hulking, bone construct, easily twice the size of a normal human, intercepted the blow. The force of the impact shattered some of its bony limbs, but it held its ground, buying Izuku precious seconds. "Shinso, Yaoyorozu, secure 13 and get the injured students to safety," Izuku commanded, his voice echoing across the plaza. Yaoyorozu, having created restraints for 13, nodded grimly. Shinso, his eyes glowing, focused his mental quirk on some of the more vulnerable villains, sowing confusion and discord among their ranks. Izuku knew he couldn't defeat the Nomu with brute force alone. Its regenerative capabilities were too significant. He needed a different approach, a way to bypass its physical defenses. He focused his dark magic, channeling the raw necrotic energy within him. The air around him crackled with power, the shadows deepening and swirling. He unleashed a wave of withering and decay, a focused blast of dark energy aimed directly at the Nomu. The air shimmered, and a visible aura of decay enveloped the creature. Its exposed muscle tissue began to blacken and wither, the regeneration slowing, struggling to keep pace with the onslaught of negative energy. The Nomu roared in pain and fury, its movements becoming sluggish and less coordinated. This was a different kind of attack, one that targeted its very biological structure. Shigaraki watched in horror as his ultimate weapon began to deteriorate. "Nomu, what's happening?" Izuku didn't give him time to react. He summoned a spectral lich, its form radiating an ancient and malevolent power. The lich raised its skeletal hands, and bolts of pure necrotic energy shot forth, striking the Nomu with devastating force. The creature staggered, its body riddled with holes, the withering effect intensifying. Just as the Nomu was on the verge of collapse, All Might burst through the entrance, his arrival heralded by a shockwave of pure power. "I am here," he declared, his voice booming with righteous fury. The tide of the battle began to shift. All Might's overwhelming strength and speed turned the tables on the League of Villains. Izuku, seeing All Might's arrival, focused his attention on securing the remaining villains. His undead, bolstered by his command, pressed their attack, overwhelming the disorganized ranks of the League. Shigaraki, realizing the situation had turned against them, made the call to retreat. Kurogiri's warp gate reappeared, and the remaining villains began to disappear into the swirling mist. The Nomu, weakened and battered, was the last to be warped away, leaving behind a scene of chaos and destruction. As the dust settled, Class 1- stood amidst the wreckage, shaken but alive. They had faced real danger, and they had survived, in no small part thanks to the unsettling power of their quiet classmate, Izuku Midoriya. The shadow that fell on the USJ that day was a dark one, but it was also the shadow of a protector. The events had irrevocably changed their perception of Izuku, a shift from wary apprehension to a grudging respect for the terrifying power he wielded and the determination with which he used it to protect them.